Thanks, Sue. Thanks to everybody for coming out here this evening. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces that weren't at the first meeting some time ago. So I'm pleased to be joined here tonight by the entire Board of Selectmen. Mr. Dave Dufresne is here, Rich Eihacker, and our chair, Derek Feliz, is here this evening. So let's give them a round of applause. I'm also joined here tonight by a very special individual who I went to high school with, who was actually a Warren resident, Rob Gothier. Rob and I were in the same homeroom at Cathedral High School back in 2000, before 2000, 96. So it's so nice to see so many familiar faces and so many good residents here this evening to talk about a very important project that we've been working on here in town. And this project is the Wrights Mills Master Recovery Plan. And what we're trying to do with this study and this plan is to help identify needs that are around the Wrights Mills complex, infrastructure needs, utility needs, housing needs, development needs, all around the Wrights Mills complex that will hopefully spur some economic development within the Wrights Mills complex. We understand that the Wrights Mills complex is privately owned. It's currently up for sale. We want to work with any potential developers in the future to help us create and build a model that the town will support within the Wrights Mills complex and to help bring some economic development here in Warren. So with that, we have our team from Weston and Sampson, who's been doing a great job helping us along, navigating us through the different master planning initiatives that has been brought forward in hopes that we can get some possible development in the future at the Wrights Mills complex. And I think tonight they're going to be talking about some of their findings and some of their options and possibilities that could happen along with the Wrights Mills complex. So I just want to thank everybody here for attending. We also do have some other elected officials here. Dawn Swistak, our treasurer, let's give her a round of applause. And the Grim Reaper, no, the tax collector, Carrie. So we want to give those people a round of applause. So thank you very much for coming this evening, and I kick it off to Weston and Sampson and Company. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Jim. My name is Susan Mara. I'm the project manager from Weston and Sampson. I'm a planner. I have been a planner for about 20 years. I have my team here, but I'm going to have them introduce themselves when they come up to do some talking in the presentation. The town, or the city I've worked for previously was an old mill town, so I've got a lot of experience trying to understand what cities can do to help move things forward. Like, we don't own them, in this case, like we don't own Wrightsville. But there are some things that the city or the town can do to understand, you know, how does this get developed in a way that really helps the town, right? And so my old boss would say, like, that's the best thing you can do, right, is to, like, understand that and put it on paper in some concepts to sort of, like, illustrate that. And the other thing that you can do is to get out of the way, right? And so what he meant by that was, you know, once you understand what it is you'd like to see there, make it as easy as possible for the developer to do what you want them to do, right? And so that's part of what's informing, I think, these discussions and these concepts, and, you know, going out to the community and trying to understand, you know, from the community and from the data that we're looking at, you know, what could you do there that has the best impact on the town, right, and the region. So you can also look at the screen there too. So we have two screens. I'll be presenting and talking as loud as I can. Please let me know if you have trouble hearing me, and then Jim and I are going to do it, like, trying to stay in tandem with our slides. So next slide, please, Jim. Okay, so who was here? Who came to the first meeting? I know I see some people who came last time. Okay, so thank you for coming back. last time we had a little bit of a like speed dating type of setup where we kind of sat at different tables and moved around. We're not doing that tonight. We'll be just kind of sitting where we are, and we'll be coming to you. So just you know, for something a little bit different. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have been up to since we had that meeting. And for the folks that weren't there, that first meeting was all about, you know, what were the things that we found in terms of the environmental, in terms of the regulations, in terms of the building themselves and their historic significance. And we talked to people about, you know, what are some of the more important things, you know, of those existing conditions that need to be preserved, that need to be, you know, promoted, and maybe some things that are less important. And so that information we used to have David Gamble, I don't know where David is, but he's here. He's gonna talk a little bit about developing a couple of concepts for redevelopment. And I want to be clear. There's 3 different concepts. This is not you know, a practice we're going to pick 1, 2, or 3 because again, the town doesn't own it. But these are illustrative examples of how a mill can get redeveloped, focusing on a certain mix of land uses, focusing on a certain, you know, sort of a commercial area. And it gave us, and it will give the town, it will give you a little bit of an opportunity to look at it, sort of understand maybe how it could work together, which of these things you think might work a little better. And so tonight's discussion isn't about, you know, which concept is the best, but which components of each concept you think will work really well and really help the town. Okay. So, one by one, we're gonna have David and Jean and Jim come up and describe these 3 concepts to go through the thought process, how they were developed. I think they're really cool. I think it looks really good, and I think, you know, I've seen mill redevelopments in a lot of other places. They can be really phenomenal and beautiful, and really help spur economic development. And so David's worked on a lot of these, and so these 3 concepts are meant to illustrate what the future could look like. And so he's going to explain one, Jim is going to explain one, and then Jean is going to explain the third. And we also try to do, you know, approach these with a variety of different types of uses, a variety of different strategies in terms of, like, some of the concepts will prioritize preservation, some might not. It doesn't mean that anyone is advocating for any of those things. We are just testing them to see how they look and then analyzing them in terms of, like, what the economic impact is. Does it make sense to keep all the buildings in terms of, like, the economic impact? Does it make sense to preserve the important ones? You know, those are complicated questions, but, you know, seeing these in actual concepts and illustrations with, like, actual counts for, like, this could be this many square footage helped us to sort of understand that a little bit. And we will provide that information to the town, and, you know, then they can provide it to any, you know, folks that are interested in redeveloping it, and it helped them inform their decision. And so once those 3 concepts are introduced, we're going to break up into 3 groups. There's 1, 2, 3 large pieces of paper where we'll take notes. I am gonna time us again. And so we're gonna take about 10 minutes to talk about each of the concepts. And we would like to hear from you. What do you like about the concept? You know, what are maybe some challenges you see with the concept, and how maybe it doesn't work in your town, you don't think? You know, because these are based on our best experience of things that have worked elsewhere. So, you know, let us know if you think there are things that we're showing that maybe aren't the right fit for your town. And 3, you know, do you have any other ideas about, you know, how to improve it, how to make it work better? This is our team, and we're going to start with. Well, we're gonna keep going with me. Sorry. So the project summary for folks that weren't here last time. We were hired by the town of Warren to work on a project that is funded by the U.S. EDA. It's called the Wrights Mill Master Redevelopment Strategy. We talked a little bit at the beginning about the fact that the town doesn't own it, but it still does make sense for the town to understand, you know, how the community feels about the redevelopment, and what parts of the, you know, what components of the redevelopment, what approaches to the redevelopment can have the greatest impact on the town, right? And so if the town is working with the developer to understand what the public infrastructure investment needs are, if they have in the back of their mind, you know, these are the type of uses that are really good for the town. You know, maybe that's a conversation that they can have in terms of their ability to assist with grant writing and assistance with public infrastructure. So our key findings, and I think these are similar to what you heard last time, is that the buildings are in good condition. Like, they've been maintained. They didn't turn off the heat and have pipes frozen. They have been maintained by a site person who walks around and makes sure, you know, he's got that broken window strategy. If he sees a broken window, it gets fixed immediately. They have not fallen into disrepair. That means that the cost to redevelopment are possibly less than they would be in a building where that's not the case. There is a little bit of a range in terms of the condition of the building, and there are some, for example, one that was built in close to 1865 that, you know, maybe is, you know, in less good condition. But in general, compared to other mill campuses and mill buildings, I think David has worked in a lot of these. This is a huge positive thing for this redevelopment that these developers have going for them.
The image on this slide is the building in the worst shape.
I did, I know.
It's also the oldest, so the broken windows theory doesn't relate to every building, but it's also one of the more prominent ones, as you know.
Yeah. It's an investment for the owners to continue to pay someone to monitor. It's an investment for the owners to keep the heat on. You know, they've taken very good care of it, and I think that that's something that is definitely that going along with that is that the campus is cohesive. So there, a lot of times there is a building here or there, and you know, you kind of look at them one by one. But in this case, the campus, how this mill developed from the start in 1865 until now, is pretty much the same, and you don't find that a lot. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, because it does sort of like make the overall redevelopment feel really, really big. But it also presents an opportunity, because there is some control and there's some ability for the buildings as they get redeveloped to kind of work with each other, you know, maybe in a way that they once did when they were originally developed. So the riverfront access, you know, they aren't making new land, and they are certainly not making new land that is right along a river. So riverfront access is a benefit to, you know, any redevelopment. The fact that you have development already along the river where there's visual access and physical access is good. You know, we protect our rivers now, and it's harder to permit those things, but when you have a mill redevelopment that's, you know, a couple hundred years old and already has that access, it's something that is really hard to recreate these days. And so that's also a really, I think, important and unique attribute to this development. The historic buildings do represent some ability for some funding opportunities. I don't want to understate that. There's not that many types of programs like this, but these historic tax credits can be beneficial to owners. It's complicated like anything else because it does increase your cost to redevelopment, but it is a really good, really important tool. When Jean comes up to talk about her concept, I might have her mention a little bit more about that because she knows a lot more about it than I do, but that's also a potential benefit for this mill campus. On the other hand, and I think that this is you know, not anything that anyone here doesn't understand, it is a little bit of a remote location. It does not have easy highway access. And so that's something to consider, and yes, it's a little bit of a constraint, but you know, when we started to put together our ideas for the concepts, we were trying to think, can we make this a positive? And so you'll see when we start to talk about them that some of the ideas around the campus focus on this rural location. There are also a few regionally important tourist draws in the area too, and so that's another opportunity. Specifically talking about Bridfield and Sturbridge. So again, as we were thinking about like, how do you get people to come out here when it's not really super convenient, like maybe you tie it to some of these other regional tourism draws. So we will start with concept one, and that is David's. And so David, you don't have to come over here, you can stay there, I'll switch for you.
Sure, I might come in the middle.
Okay, yeah. Good idea.
I just think I'm behind you. Okay. Great, thanks Sue, and thank you all for coming. I know your time is precious. I'm an architect and a planner, and I've spent most of my career trying to reposition very large, often post-industrial or industrial properties to new uses in economies that can't always support them anymore. So there's a lot of these things in the American landscape: asylums, hospitals, campuses, industrial complexes, and you may have seen some in your travels that have been redeveloped, and you might wonder, well, why can't this one be repositioned? Well, maybe it can. A sobering thought is it often takes a generation or more for a complex of this size to be redeveloped. Even Mass MoCA took 25 years, honestly, before it even started to turn a profit and become the economic engine that it is for North Adams. And that's a very particular one-off case. But it doesn't mean it can't happen. And as Sue said, there are a variety of attributes to this campus that make it a little bit better positioned than others. We've done probably a dozen projects like this with Weston and Sampson in Maine and Connecticut and Ohio and New York and Massachusetts, of course, and they all have very particular conditions: regions, scales, ownership, properties, contamination, of course, etc. So the three options that we're showing you today are actually coming out of conversations that we had with the group that was here in the fall. If you didn't make that meeting, that's fine, because we're going to go over what those lessons were. But we're also trying to be, I don't want to say sober, but realistic about these challenges. So 600,000 square feet is tantamount to 5 super Walmarts, to give you a sense of scale. Those are, of course, on one floor, but it's a lot of space to fill up, which is actually both an opportunity and a challenge. It's an opportunity because that 600,000 square feet is spread across really 17 buildings. That is a lesson that we've learned from other complexes, that smaller buildings that are actually separated from other ones are more likely to transform because they don't depend on the success of their neighbors. They can actually be redeveloped by a developer in a different use, and over time it can sort of grow. So that is a benefit to this complex. There's multiple buildings, multiple spaces between them, and the three options that we're going to show you vary in their relationships to how much you build, what those programs could be, and yes, even what some selective demolition might be in order to release the opportunity. Not a lot, because one of the things that we heard in the fall was preserve as much as you can. How many of you in this room, raise your hand, have actually been through some of these buildings? Okay, I'd say more than half. Many of them are relentless in ways that older industrial buildings used to be, right? They have a fenestration pattern that continues. They're pretty wide spaces. Good for some things, not good for others. As an example, if you want to turn one of these into apartments or condominiums, there's only a couple that would be well positioned for that, given their size, the column spacing, the amount of natural light that comes into it. Number 5, the building that was on the cover, is actually one of those, which has the peaks, the roof lines that you see from the road. That's a great thing because you can see it from a distance, and if that were to be 80 to 90 units of housing, that would be a pretty good place to start. And there's a lot of developers that turn old mill buildings into housing, so that's not out of the realm of possibility. Bringing more manufacturing into it provides, again, some challenges, but also some opportunities. They were always manufacturing. Let's get a different type of manufacturing in these spaces in the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. As Sue said, there's landscape around it. There are hills. There's an adjacent neighborhood. There's access. There's actually a loop road that goes around it, which provides different ways to get into it. A lot of good things, but still difficult to pull off. So I guess what we'd like you to leave you with tonight is walking out knowing that this won't be easy, but it's not impossible. And it's finding the right partner, the right developer who has that experience to do this, and market it in a way that attracts those developers to Warren. So the first concept, if you have the sheet of paper, concept one, what we're calling community stitch. Just give me a minute to try to describe this. This is an aerial view from above. There's a dark red line that represents essentially a way of crossing through the property. There used to be a bridge that connected Main Street to the complex. Does anybody remember that? Oh, there are a few people that remember that. All right. It was torn down after a flood. That would provide a great way to get across to the complex without having to sort of narrowly walk around on South Street, which has a sidewalk on one side, but it's not great. So this project, this concept, is about taking advantage of the commercial area at the intersection of South and Main. That's where it begins. And the dashed line is suggesting that there could be almost like a campus connection that links different buildings. It's a pedestrian path. In this version, we call it Community Stitch because it links the commercial area to the neighborhood in the south. The only things that get demolished are the things that were built that are non-historic. Like there's a connector between, if you can see the numbers, buildings 7 and 8. If that were to be demolished, you'd actually see the river from the campus and you could get across to it. That's non-historic. It's 2 stories of a tiny little walkway, which is actually not in very good shape. That would come down in order to make the campus more visible. The comment was flood control? Yeah.
Any area of, yeah.
It's vulnerable to flooding, right? Right there?
It's part of the levee system.
Yes,
So
that portion of the wall is.
That would have
Yeah.
to be looked into
Yeah.
more with the Army Corps and everything.
So the let's say the architectural idea is preserve as much as you can. Let's create a connection between the buildings, demolish very selectively, and then take advantage of the outdoor recreation, the hills, the neighborhood, the trail, actually the river itself. So the programs that might come into this concept would have to do with biking and hiking and farm to table. As you know, let's get some a restaurant there that might be more locally based or bring one in from another area. The potential market actually could be wide open. It would be attractive to active adults and also young families or youth. There are different types of partners and funding that would be attracted to this concept. And as someone who's worked in a lot of these projects, there are a lot of advantages to starting somewhere that allows people to access it. There's a building in the middle, you can't see it, it's right behind the smokestack, that's building number 12. It's a 3,500 square foot pole barn, basically. It's a shed, maintenance shed, but you can park all around it. And most people will arrive to this complex by car. If you started there and that became a pretty cool restaurant or a brew pub, or we just finished one in Dayton, Ohio, in an old building, brew pubs need space and volume and parking. You know, that would just get people on the property legally, right? and
purpose.
and yeah, bring some visibility. Much of this is just like, let's just get some activity, some programs, let's get some activity. And sometimes that's in the buildings that are least likely or maybe least architecturally impressive. So this concept one is also saying start small, build kind of in the middle, make better connections, and then think of the open space around it as opportunities for more active recreation. And then we will, at the break, we'll come back and ask you a lot of questions about, you know, what works on that, what doesn't, etc. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to Jim, and we've got the second version actually is kind of different in thinking about the type of space and the type of programs, and it also involves a little bit more demolition.
Thanks very much, David. I'm Jim Reardon. I'm also from Weston and Sampson. I work closely with Sue. I lead the planning group there, and she and I have been working on this project together, managing this project for the last few months. Thank you all for coming out this evening. Really appreciate it. It's great to have you here. We're really looking forward to your input on this. And as Sue mentioned, you know, this is a privately held piece of property. So
They're asking if you can talk a little bit louder.
oh, sure. Maybe direct my voice this way a little bit more. So,
Yeah, go in the middle and I'll
All right.
pass the slide this way.
all right, thanks.
Sure.
So the idea here, of course, is, you know, this is a privately held piece of property. We don't get to necessarily decide what happens to it, as Sue was mentioning, but maybe some of what we do this evening helps to inform it. So I'd like you to keep that in mind as we're going through this concept. Concept 2, you can see on this piece of paper. So just a little bit of orientation on the piece of paper here. Concept 1 is on the front page. Concept 2 and 3 are on the back page. Concept 2 is, if you're looking at the paper on the left-hand side, and it says Campus Quad. And the idea here is that this would become a manufacturing and innovation hub. So bring business into the area, that it would be the sort of light manufacturing that might be supported by local universities, interested developers who would focus on new kinds of manufacturing and light manufacturing business. To make this concept work, we felt that it was very important to have sort of a central area. So as David put it to me earlier today, great campuses have great quads. And you can see in the middle here, there's great quad. And hopefully we can see that on, yeah, good, on each of the slides too. So that involves some selective demolition. The shed building that David mentioned might get demolished and maybe reused as like a brew pub or something like that. That would be taken out of this as well, right in the middle. There's another building right next to that would also be removed. And then some of the older buildings as well, and a couple of the buildings close to the roadway. So again, the idea here is that you'd bring in light manufacturing that would be supported by universities. Maybe you'd have some sort of an exchange program or something like that, and it would bring that kind of, if you will, traffic into the town. So, you know, you get more interest from, you know, folks from the university who have, you know, younger people who have technological ideas and things like that that they might bring in, and that would hopefully support some development around the town, economic development as well. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jean for concept 3, right?
Yeah, and just to reiterate our point, right, so one of the key findings we talked about at the beginning is the remote location, right, and so part of the challenge there is to create the destination, and so David and Jim just talked about two different concepts where that approach is a little different, right? David's approach to the destination includes like a restaurant or a brew pub or something that's related to, you know, the recreation resources in the area, whereas this concept 2 that Jim talked about, where like your destination is more focused on the, you know, the industrial. Again, these are you know, sort of a little bit of a brainstorming activity with a measure of reality, you know, based on the types of redevelopments that we've seen, and were developed as a way to try to maybe address some of the constraints that, you know, have stood in the way for redevelopment for, you know, in the past. Sorry, Jean. Sure. You want to go in the middle too, and we'll.
No, I think I can speak up. If I can't, then just raise your hand or something. My name is Jean Boyle. I'm a planning and economic development consultant. Most of my experience, can you hear me?
No, she can't hear you. She couldn't hear that other young lady either.
Okay, I will come in the middle then. All right. My name is Jean Boyle. I'm a planning and economic development consultant, and I'm working with Weston and Sampson. most of my career has been as a municipal economic and development, planning development director. For the last few years, though, I have been working with a lot of private developers. So that gives me a little bit of a different perspective on what's required to actually turn a lot of these projects into a reality. As much as, you know, as a municipal planner and as a municipal economic developer, I want to see something that really fulfills what a town or a city is looking for. I also have, I think, an appreciation of what some of the financing realities are and some of the development realities. I think you've heard a lot about how impressed we are with a lot of the attributes of this site. It's on a riverfront, you've got a lot of the green space around it, and there are some wonderful historic characteristics of the building. In concept number 3, you'll see that we're looking at more demolition and actually looking at it, I think, not just as buildings, but also as property and as a site. What is it that's unique about this property that could actually attract development? So in concept, and what we're proposing in concept number 3, or suggesting in concept number 3, is to retain the most significant historical buildings and to redevelop them and to restore them for mixed use, probably for some sort of multifamily, but also with some amenities associated with it. There is a significant amount of demolition that's also being proposed as part of this scenario, and that's would be replaced with lower density residential development. And I think the concept behind that is that with that lower density residential development, you could also respond to a sector of the market that is looking for single family, for higher, sort of higher end development as well, and where you really are kind of leaning into all of these site attributes and locational attributes, where being remote is not a bad thing. We're driving down a country road to your new home, being on the riverfront, being surrounded with green space is a good thing, because perhaps the higher density development is not necessarily what can be marketed for this particular site. In this particular proposal, we tried to be respectful of the most significant historical buildings. So I think that you do have that mixture of protection of the historic, but also really, really emphasizing the, I think, the environmental aspects and giving you a greater combination of housing types that could be offered. The other thing too is that, you know, we can talk about it a little bit later, but for a community, you also want to look at what are the fiscal impacts. And affordable housing is a wonderful thing. I'm certainly not opposed to that, and I've done a lot to promote that in my career. But you also want to have some higher end housing too, which also builds up the community's tax base. So I think this particular concept will give you that mixture of housing types and income types, and I think also will attract people who are not necessarily deterred by the distance of this location from the major metropolitan areas.
So what you're seeing is every one of those little squares is about 6,000 square feet that could be divided into 2 3,000 square foot units. That's a little box, and anything that's a dashed line would be a building that's getting demolished.
And not that I'm going to do a market study or anything, but one of the communities that I've been involved in and a project that I was involved in was a former steel mill property. It was one of the dirtiest sites in New England, where it was cleaned up. It was also on a riverfront, and they're selling some of the units for duplex type of homes for as much as $1 million a piece. So I'm not saying that that's what necessarily happened here. The other thing about this is that we've talked about how you can't absorb necessarily 600,000 square feet at once, either from a development standpoint or a financing standpoint. This is also a way to sort of chip away at the development possibilities associated with this property. So that's kind of the summary of option 3.
We gave the economist the third scheme because it's mostly demolition.
No, but we kept the good stuff. Right? But I also think that it just, and it also creates like a new village. So you've got this sort of ability to have this is like a new place, and I think a new destination, and it can be really a great addition to the community.
So building 5, which is in the middle, which has the roof line, that would remain. And building 3, which is directly off of South Street, that's the old entryway, the office space to the complex. Those 2 buildings alone is 35% of the square feet of the complex. You know, that's nearly 200,000 square feet. So you've got a lot of room even within those for growth. I don't mean to demonize you, Gene.
No, that's okay.
Maybe it's just to say, like, we wanted to present a big range of alternatives, as planners, like, oh, mixed use, let's all do, but it's not always something that's feasible. And so if you want to decide to go in a direction, especially for the town, for Jim, right? If someone's asking, like, well, why did you think about this? If you have this information, and you show the economic impact, you can say, did look at that, and it didn't make sense because of this. So it's meant to show everyone a range, so we can test some of the potential impacts on the town.
You can kind of mix and match. There's certain aspects that
Thank
you
you.
may look at something in option 1 and say, why can't we insert that in option 2? Or then we talk about 3 that you like to see. So this is just intended for discussion purposes, and we want to get feedback. This isn't like these are not, cast in
You must
stone.
choose 1 or 2.
Oh, no.
That's right.
Please don't.
Yeah,
Because really,
yeah.
the whole idea was to really give something that was,
Spur
it's for
discussion.
This is a starting point for discussion, and if we can mix and match and turn it into something that is really, the option 4 that everybody loves, then I think we can all leave this meeting very happy.
Yeah.
So, Sue, I saw a couple of hands go up, I think. Do you want to take questions now, or?
Let me ask you, because we're gonna break out and talk specifically about some of the alternatives in the smaller groups. Do you wanna wait for that, or do you wanna ask the question now? It's up to you. I thought it was him, but it wasn't him.
Yep, maybe the question evaporated.
Okay. We'll take questions at the end, but I'm glad that Jean said that, because that's exactly what I maybe should have been more clear about at the beginning. Right, we're not voting on concepts, we're voting on components of each of these that you like, because you think it could work really well here, and that they are definitely transferable. So,
Alex, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't realize she was talking to me.
sorry.
On number 3, you guys said you wanted to keep the most historical buildings, but I noticed the original one from the 1800s in the back you guys would get rid of in that one.
Good catch. The most historical buildings that are in best position to be redeveloped. The oldest building is the one that has all the windows broken. We've been through it. It's in tough shape. It would be a heavy lift. So I guess we should
We'll qualify that.
qualify it by saying buildings 3 and 5 are kind of the most significant buildings in fairly good shape. Is that fair? Yeah.
With the best kind of redevelopment.
With the
potential.
most likely redevelopment potential.
We have a question here.
Okay, so each concept kept building 1 north, 1 south, which I don't think are historic. They're more recent, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious,
Great question.
especially in probably number 3, I mean, that could have been another loop of housing maybe. So
Okay.
why would you keep,
Okay, good question.
I mean, they're not attractive buildings really either. The other buildings are much more attractive.
Okay, good question. So he's calling into question our desire to keep the buildings from the 50s and 60s. My response would be that's still historic.
Yeah.
Number 2 is they're actually in pretty good shape, and they're very large. That could accommodate even indoor parking, which, believe it or not, matters a lot in redevelopment. So we did keep those. You could imagine that they could easily come down, but we've been a little bit, I don't know, ideologically agnostic. We're not trying to just writ large demolish things. We want to keep as much as possible. In the manufacturing scenario, that could be a grocery store, it could be a light manufacturing, it could be a lot of things because it's 12-foot floor-to-ceiling heights, it's open span, the bays are at least 25 feet wide, so we're trying to keep as much as we can, your kind of critique notwithstanding.
The layout of those buildings, make them so they can also be used for industrial, better than some of the former industrial historic buildings too. So, you know, if you are going to do industrial there, like, you kind of want to keep them, because they are the most likely to be reused for that use.
And if I could just also mention that, you know, we're saying, yeah, we're keeping the historic buildings and that's all great, but it can be a very arduous process. So one of the things that we like to talk about is that one of the best benefits associated with rehabilitation of historic buildings for a developer is historic tax credits. They can get historic tax credits of up to 30% if they do it the right way. As part of that process, the state, the federal government is going to look at whether or not just the integrity of the building, they will look at the integrity of the entire property. So there is the risk of, even if you are doing selective demolition, that you may go too far. So it's always going to be sort of a back and forth process if a developer is trying to get historic tax credits. The process usually starts with the creation of a historic district, and that can be initiated by the developer, it can be initiated by the town. And once you have this historic district established, then you are basically, that's your entry point to getting historic tax credits. But then the conversations start. You know, you might get some pushback from the state or from the federal government saying, you know, time out. You know, you say that building doesn't make sense for development. Well, we think it's too important from a historic standpoint, and you're going to have to rethink your development concept and keep that. Or the way you're proposing to renovate it doesn't meet Department of Interior standards. So it's always, I mean, I think that those are excellent questions that everyone is asking, but this is still on the very conceptual level. But I do think that one of the things we want to hear from you is, you know, maybe some of these concepts are going too far in the direction of selective demolition. And, you know, those are the kind of modifications that we could make to any of these different iterations. Maybe you like some of those things about it, but we keep more of the historic, and also don't risk losing out on those historic tax credits, which are so important as far as an incentive in getting private investment into this project.
So I'm going to take Sue's cue. People are more likely to participate if they're in smaller groups. We can break into 3 groups of 12 to 15. I think it's going to be more productive, and then we can reconvene.
And we'll keep
if that's okay. Can you hold your question, or do you?
Well, I'd like to present it to the group if I could.
Sure, okay.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, these are wonderful ideas. I think this is super. But it's gonna be the developer in the long run that makes the decision. So no matter whether we want those buildings torn down or not, that's really not gonna be up to us, because the property is privately owned. I mean, you're gonna give them concepts. Listen, these are our ideas. You get developers that come in that say, that's great, but that doesn't work for us. Then they do what they want when they purchase the property. So before everybody gets worked up about, you're taking down buildings I don't want you to take down, or you're doing this and I don't want you to do that. This is just you guys coming up with a concept that we appreciate that you're going to offer to someone, but the option is still there, is to determine exactly what happens with that property they purchase. Am I wrong?
Yes and
No,
no.
you're 100%
No.
right.
I always like a mixed answer.
I would add to that, it's very likely that any developer who come in would have their own concept, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so we're trying to help you and help inform them. So,
Yeah, if I could just comment, you know, in my experiences, and with my municipal experience, and Sue, I think, touched on that in her remarks too, it's usually a give and take in a partnership. A good developer doesn't just come blasting into town and say, I'm doing this and I don't care what the town says. There are a lot of different leverage points that a town has, and it's usually a collaborative thing. I mean, I've worked collaboratively with developers throughout my career, and they'll usually come in an initial meeting and meet with the town and say, this is what we're thinking of. You know, what is your opinion? Because there are things that the town will do for them to make it easier. We've talked about all sorts of grants that can be provided for the infrastructure that's going to be necessary to actually make this development happen. It isn't just an island sitting in the middle of your town. The other thing is that we talked about historic tax credits. if the town chose to designate this area as a historic district, that basically opens up the possibilities for historic tax credits for the developer. It's usually, yes, ultimately it is private property, and they, within the confines of your regulations, can do things, but usually it doesn't work that way, especially not for something this big. It's too big a development, it's too important a development for a developer to just basically come in and not work in cooperation with the town. That's not, hasn't been my
A
experience.
developer wants a community-supported plan, because that means a process that's gonna be a little bit more expedited than if they have to go through multiple meetings and there's strong community frustration with their plan and the proposal, and you have a voice in that.
That's right. So if the, the town understands what it wants, I've seen, and Jean has seen, right, examples where a town will almost like, not pre-permit something for what they want, but make it really easy to get the types of uses and the type of development that you want. And so that, what that does is save them time and money, right? And so, it's not foolproof, but, it can help lead them to making the decision that the town wants to make.
And keep in mind, you're their customers. If they're gonna be creating retail space,
Yeah.
they want you to come shop there. If they're creating new housing, they want some of you to come live there. So it's not in the developer's best interest to antagonize the community that they're coming into.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We do have to start doing our breakouts, and we won't lose any questions, I promise. Like, we can write it down and we can ask it again when we're back in. But I we wanna get feedback on the specific concepts. I think that's really important, and I don't wanna not be able to do that. So it looks like those tables over there, maybe you can stay with Jean.
Yeah, I'll pull this forward, and I think probably right about here, these two tables, the 2, 4, 6, 8,
And
9,
the folks that
and maybe
So each one is doing